Welcome to the Faith Science Podcast, episode 17. I'm your host, Jerry Swafford, and on this podcast, we explore the integration of science with faith. Today's guest is an experienced freelance video producer. His passion is making the Bible relevant, especially for homeschool families, believers, and anyone interested in the historical and geographical aspects of the Bible. He is a co founder of Appian Media, which has a three-pronged approach to creating biblical media geared toward young people: accuracy, professional production, and free accessibility. Our guest today is Craig Dehut. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I always like to start with what I'm missing in that I was watching Out of Egypt the other day, and you have several hats when it comes to that production. So I think, well, we'll talk about you like making bricks in the in there
Right.
for a second. That wasn't in like the credits, but you're
No.
editor, I think, cinematography. So what would you just say in general, if somebody asks, I'm a producer, that's basically what you would say?
Yeah, it kind of depends on who's asking.
Okay.
Filmmaker is usually a more inclusive, all-encompassing, and it's true for any member of our team. We're always all wearing multiple hats. And so, yeah, what you see there during Out of Egypt, I was wearing my cinematographer hat primarily, and then did proceed to edit the majority of that as well.
Okay. But before we talk about how you go from whatever you were doing before this to that, what is cinematography exactly? What is
Sure.
that?
So yeah, so we're the ones handling the cameras. We're the one kind of crafting the story. You think of a photographer; they're taking still images,
Hmm.
and that will involve shaping light and framing the scene and taking a single image. Cinematographers, we're doing that, but it's 24 pictures a second, and so we're framing the light and managing the scene and shaping the light and framing the scene and just trying to tell stories with moving pictures.
Okay. So was this something you grew up knowing that you wanted to become a cinematographer, or what's the
Hmm.
story that where you're a kid and then you get to this point where that's what you do now?
Yeah, I probably as early as 12 or 13 years old, someone had gifted our family a camcorder that myself and our siblings would take out in the backyard and make all kinds of ridiculous things. For many years, we just did that because it was fun. But in high school, I actually started to consider that it could be something I could do for a career. I really enjoyed the idea of crafting a story and then creating the pieces through the different scenes and the different characters and cutting it together. Back then, it was two VCRs. We were really cool that way. And cutting together a story that people could enjoy. And so I did. I went to film school after high school and studied for a couple of years and then spent some time in news, but all the while was trying to find avenues where I could create stories and share them with people.
Okay. So you went to film school and then you started doing news. So that was where you were, I guess, learning the skill set that kind of you're now using it at Appian Media.
Right. Yes. And that was a little bit of shift because mostly in film school, I had grand plans of being like the next Steven Spielberg.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to write and direct feature films. I wanted to do narrative films. And so I was working with actors and writing scripts and scouting locations. And but coming out of film school was looking for work, looking for ways to kind of hone that craft, and wasn't finding. Steven Spielberg was not calling me up asking me to work alongside of him, and I couldn't understand that for the first
Right.
couple of years. But found a job working at a couple of different television stations in Kentucky. And it was then that I started to really enjoy telling stories of real people and real things. I still have a love for narrative, fictional narrative. But going out and capturing events and people and hearing their stories, learning about what they're up to or who they are, became very, very interesting to me. And fast forward another 6, 7 years, was able to then work for myself, creating those kind of stories. And then Appian Media was kind of born from that skill set that I had been developing the last 6, 7, 8 years.
Okay, so you're in Kentucky doing news, but you want to tell stories. Now that's not a you said you really like fiction, so that's not exactly the same as what you're doing
Right.
now. So
Yeah, very
was there a
different.
time where you were doing some fiction stuff and then you decided to kind of transition to more of the biblical media? What's the story there?
There was, yeah, and I enjoyed fictional stories, but there was always a desire, even before I went to film school, to tell stories that communicated godly, moral principles. And so I think now we just call them Christian films.
Hmm.
Back then, there just weren't a lot of those being made,
Okay.
and not necessarily stories that always had to overtly mention Christ, but stories that I wanted to communicate something biblically true, a moral that would. I apologize. I just lost connection to my camera. Well, I probably messed that all up, didn't I? How
Um,
much do you edit?
I guess I'll be editing some here.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
Well, I apologize. I can see it on my end. I'm just not sure how to turn that back on yours.
Okay.
Oh, there we are.
Okay. That looks like that's it.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. I mean, maybe I should just leave it in. I don't know. Well,
That's
I'm
right.
sure.
And then you can
Yeah.
communicate to people that video production never happens the way that you anticipate it
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
problem solvers at our
Right.
core. So,
Okay.
um, yeah. So I'm trying to pick up my train of thought there. I always wanted to communicate something that communicated a biblical moral. I wanted
Hmm.
people to be better after watching the piece of content than they were going in, and was trying to kind of combine those two things together. And so when the opportunity came, when this idea was born with our co-founder Stuart Peck, that we could not just tell biblically relevant, or morally relevant stories, but that we could actually travel to the Bible lands and tell the stories of the Bible, shooting the real places and considering the real events and the real people. That was very interesting to me. So it combined a love that I had from the very beginning of filmmaking, which was to communicate something biblically true, but certainly took a different approach than I had studied in school.
Right. So, had you gone into maybe trying to work with these Christian films? I mean, one of the drawbacks to certainly 10 years ago, I think they're much better now, but like a lot of the
Yes,
Christian films, it's like nobody really wants to watch that, or it's just not.
it's true.
It's you want the morals of it, but the story or this, let's say the cinematography, whatever,
Yeah,
there's just something that's just not quite there. Did you try that?
yeah,
Try some of that first, and then kind of say, because it seems like this professional aspect is something that you are really, when it comes to Appian Media, you say we want something that looks professionally done, not some kind of second rate um,
correct.
media.
That was always really important to us, and I agree with you. And I've spoken with. There are individuals who are now considered to be some of the forerunners of quality Christian media. That
Mhm.
10 years ago, they'll be very honest with you and say, "Hey, 10 years ago, our stuff was not good." So you think of people like the Kendrick brothers. They were making films like Facing the Giants and Fireproof, and it
Mhm.
was around that time, I think, just around the time that I was coming out of film school, um, where they were trying. and they were just getting started. And by their
Right.
own admission, they had not been professionally trained, but they had a desire. They had a very little amount of money, and so they just made it themselves. But they were progressively getting better. Doors were starting to open, but there certainly weren't a lot of opportunities for me to, the chosen was not being made. And
Right.
the type of productions that we think of now did not exist. This was back in 2007 when I graduated. Um, and so I was trying to look for work just to improve my skill set and working on commercial things, creating videos for businesses and products. And that's what eventually brought me to news. It was an avenue that I was interested in and wanted to pursue a little more of, and it allowed me to rub shoulders with professional people who were doing their craft very well. So that when the desire came for us, this was in 2015, where Stuart and I were having coffee and talking about the state of the industry, and we were talking about Christian media and kind of poking fun at it a little bit, wishing that it could be better. We thought to ourselves naively, like, how hard could it possibly be? Surely we could just go over to Israel and make this kind of content. Not really, and we've never considered it competition, not really competing against these others. They were doing well and they were getting better and they were pursuing narrative fiction. We wanted to pursue biblical documentary. But it was very important to us from the beginning that it needed to be able to hold its own up against a history channel or a travel channel type of production value. Obviously, we're communicating different things than they do, but we wanted it to look and feel that professional. And we've been trying to achieve that and improve that ever since.
So when you're sitting there at coffee with your co-founder, you, you just kind of say, I think we can, I mean, documentaries is the first thing that comes to mind for you. You say, hey, we could
Yeah.
go do a documentary, and that's how that basically started.
Yeah, so it actually was spurred on by a desire that Stu had at the time. He was teaching a high school Bible class, and he was seeing these young people come in who were used to learning this way, right? Scrolling on their phones or consuming media to learn. They were doing it in their schools, they were doing it at home, but he was finding, at least in 2015, that in Bible classes it wasn't being done a lot. We would kind of encourage them to put all those things away,
Right.
and we would use other methods. Now, we would use the book, and the book is valuable. God chose that form of media long ago, and it's worked well, and it's going to continue to work. But he said, I also want to show them the places. And he was scouring YouTube, scouring the internet, trying to find something that was free because you didn't want to, pay for a bunch of stuff, something that was biblically accurate, that he didn't have to give a lot of caveats and say, well, this part is accurate, but over here has come from a different bias, and or this historical, that's not actually factual. He wanted it biblically accurate, and he wanted, let's see, professionally produced, freely available and biblically accurate and professionally produced. He wanted it to look and feel quality, and he couldn't find anything that accomplished those three things: free and quality and accurate. And so that's when he and I, in that coffee shop over several different visits, thought, like, we could do that. We know how to do something quality. We know how to communicate in a way. At the time, he was actually working on a well-known home renovation show in the Indianapolis area as one of their field producers. And so he was in that world very much. And he's like, I think that we could do this. Let's assemble a team. Let's try to raise some money, and let's go to Israel. And I think by God's goodness, we were able to do that the very next year.
Yeah. Now, so what was the first big project there?
So we
It was in
produced,
Israel.
it was in Israel. It was called Following the Messiah. And our first trip was about a 2-week trip where we produced the first 5 episodes of what would become a 10-episode series. And each episode it's between 20 and 30 minutes long. So we were going over there producing two and a half hours worth of content. And so we traveled over there. We took a small team. I think I've got this right. There were 7 of us that first year, a couple of hosts and 3 of us who were operating the cameras and the equipment, and some, production assistants. And we traveled over there and produced those first 5 episodes. We released, we traveled in it was in June of 2016, and we released those first 5 episodes the following January, and then took another trip that very next summer and produced the next 6 episodes. And so that has remained our most popular series. It's the story of Jesus. It's hard to compete with that particular story. Right. But those 10 episodes have been seen around the world, and we're very thrilled with that first project.
Okay, so how did this work? Are you still working in Kentucky at the news station, and he's still working on the show, and you take a 2-week vacation? And
right.
what
So I guess
what's going on here?
Right. I've missed a couple of steps. So I'm trying to think of when it was. It was in 2012, 2012, where I had actually moved. My wife and I and our young son had moved up to. Well, I guess our son was born as soon as we moved to the Indianapolis area. I had taken a job at a video production company, producing content for other businesses and non-for-profits, and did that for 2 or 3 years. And it was during that time that I was having these conversations with Stuart. And let's see, yeah, they allowed me to take a 2-week trip to Israel. It was not vacation; it was just time off. And we were able to raise the funds through a Kickstarter campaign that previous spring, and took that trip, raised those funds on the front end, because again, we're giving this content away for free as soon as we finish it.
Right.
And came back from Israel and actually left that job at the video production company. And within 3 days of being back from Israel, and began editing that content right away.
Was that the
That was
plan?
my responsibility. That was not the plan.
Okay. Because you have a
was not
wife
the
and a young
plan.
son, and you're in
That's correct.
Indianapolis, and you just come back and
So in one fell swoop, the suggestion was made that I leave that employment, and so I became what we now refer to as a contract worker or a freelancer, where I now do freelance video for a variety of clients, as well as the work that I now do with Appian Media. And so that's now the producing and shooting and editing and managing the organization. So
okay. So you say it was suggested. That was
I'm trying to be
somebody's
very polite about
right.
it. My bosses suggested that I find other employment.
Okay. So yeah, so you, but I mean, you still are doing that kind of thing, but you're doing it
Absolutely. Yep.
on your
Now
own.
I'm just
So you
doing it
kind
for
of have
myself.
you do it for yourself.
Yeah.
For various businesses, you can shoot video and produce it for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
They saw the passion that I was having in this new endeavor, and the work, my job at that company had essentially turned into a glorified salesman position. So I was selling the services, I was working with the clients, but I had not picked up a camera in months.
Mhm.
My role had kind of changed to a degree where I wasn't getting to do the things that I loved.
Right.
And so the solution that was recommended was that I go and do the things that I love
Well,
somewhere
I mean,
else. It
I
was the
mean, that's
it
a
was the
good thing, I
best
think.
thing. It
Yeah.
really was the best thing that could have happened to me. It was a choice I probably wasn't prepared to make for myself.
Okay.
But honestly, within 24 hours, I realized I am now free and flexible to pursue this thing that has become one of my greatest passions. So
Right. Okay, so then you delve into that, and you all get this Finding the Messiah series out, and from the beginning, you're wanting to put this on YouTube. I assume this is
we wanted to put it online. Certainly,
okay.
we put it on our website. We wanted to make it available for free. We were going to, at the initial outset, we were going to be a digital only company because we were going to make it available. You could just watch it or download it, stream it. And very early, we realized, especially with our desire to make this available in a Bible classroom or at home, people were still in love with DVDs. It didn't make any sense. It still doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Those things are still around. And so we also made them available on DVD. And we, within just a couple of years, began producing workbooks, very robust, full color, high quality printed workbooks that incorporate the videos via QR code. We do make those available for purchase. But small groups and churches and homeschool groups and families are now buying these workbooks that give even more detail, that all link to the videos and get you really diving deep into the text of Scripture. So,
Okay. So would you say that, I think that's what's in your description, that you're kind of looking at to homeschool families, and uh, believers in general, but just people who are looking to delve a little bit deeper into what are these places that we're reading about in Scripture? How
yeah,
can we learn more about them? Is that a shift from the beginning, or was that kind of the plan from the outset? We
it's
want
been
to help out
interesting,
these people.
right? From the beginning, it originally was recognized that young people seem to be becoming disengaged with the biblical text.
Hmm.
And so that was the initial spark, was young people. But we realized it's not just young people, but especially our generation and younger. We're learning in a different way than past generations have learned. We've got
Hmm.
access to now media and the internet in a way that wasn't previously available. We realized as soon as we released those first 5 videos that it wasn't just young people who wanted this content. Even younger people were watching it. Small children were watching it.
Yeah.
But then we were having, people retirement age, older, saying, "I've been a Christian for 50 years, and I've never pictured the lands of the Bible in an accurate way. Now that you've shown me, that's been a blessing." And so, um, I would say the same kind of happened with the homeschool community. I did grow up homeschool, as well as my siblings. We homeschool our children, but it wasn't originally, we're going to create Appian Media for homeschool families. But obviously, once you start releasing free, high quality media online, homeschool families are going to
Right.
find that
They're all for that.
and
Yeah.
ask you for more. And so it very quickly became, okay, well, we can see that this can be modified in a way that families and homeschool families are using it, and we've encouraged that. Um, so um, we've had prison ministries say, "Hey, we can bring this content into these prisons." Obviously, they've got to jump through a few hoops to do that, but it can be
Mhm.
done, and it has been done. That wasn't on our radar, but we love it that someone's doing that.
Okay.
And it really comes back to the heart of what we do and our mission. It's why we're called Appian Media. It's the Appian way that was this first century Roman roadway that connected all of these different countries during the first century. And it's what historians tell us is one of the reasons why Christianity actually spread as quickly as it did, because for the first time in history, nations are connected in a way where information can travel faster than it had previously traveled, along with an almost universal language, which was Greek at the time. And so we're trying to do the same. You've got this roadway of the internet, and it's connecting people all over the world, and information can travel fast. And we're simply putting the truth of Scripture in a way that's enjoyable to consume. We hope that it's entertaining to consume,
Mhm.
but it's also, we think, profoundly truthful and encouraging, and it can spread on this roadway that's been built.
Okay. So you said before that you and Stu, you were at the coffee shop and you naively thought that, hey, we can do this. What is it that you found over the course of, I guess, the past 10 years you've been doing this, that has been the most difficult part of all of this that you just didn't see at the time?
Hmm. They say in business, especially, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so I'm actually very glad that we didn't know,
Uh-huh.
because we probably would have like psyched ourselves out of it and convinced ourselves this was too big and too hard. Traveling to those countries to shoot video, most people think that safety is the principal concern, and that's the principal challenge. Truthfully, we have found that not necessarily to be the case. There have been, situations that we've been in that you need to be mindful and maybe a little bit more on guard. But on the whole, that's not been the number one challenge. The number one challenge is just the logistics of moving a crew through these countries and getting the proper permissions. You can't just show up to the Temple Mount and start shooting video. Like
Right.
they don't like that. And so we want to do everything above board, and everything is legally. And so securing those permissions and permits, and being flexible when things don't work, or according to the schedule that we hoped it would. And so financing has always been a challenge, because unlike a traditional documentary where they get investors, they make the content and then they hope that they'll sell enough or get a distribution deal to, pay those investors back. We are raising all of the money necessary, not just for the trip, but for the pre-production before the trip, for the film permits and the crew, and all of the months and months of editing and distribution. And we need to raise all those funds at the beginning.
Right.
And that has been a challenge. And we've been blessed with some incredible, generous individuals throughout our history that keep coming back for more. And we are attracting new audiences, every time we put out new content, saying we think this is valuable, and we're investing in this. Not that they hope to see a financial return. We're
Right.
not for profit, but they're investing in what they believe to be valuable Christian content, for themselves and specifically for the next generation.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Out of Egypt, but there was this scene in the documentary where you all were trying to get up on a mountain and these people were saying, you need to pay some more money. And you all were
Yes.
kind of saying, I don't, I don't know if we should pay the more money or what happens. Then you finally
Yeah.
start going up the mountain. But that's kind of an example of what you're saying, I guess, that
Right.
sometimes you get over there, you think you've got your permits in place, and then they
Stuff
can just
happens.
say,
Yeah.
no, you need to pay us some more money, and you have to try to
Yeah.
figure out how to do that. Um, but talk about Out of Egypt. That's the most recent project. What is Out of Egypt, and how talk about that? Maybe even
Yeah.
compare it to the very first project where you went to Israel, and
Mm.
because it seemed like you had more than 7 people there. I tried to
We did.
count, but it seemed like it was more than seven.
That's correct. Yeah, there were a lot of things that were different from Out of Egypt than any previous production. Um, so just to recap, we created Following the Messiah. We then did another series in Israel called Searching for a King, which was about King Saul and David and Solomon. We did a series in Turkey about the seven churches of Revelation. So
Mm.
for us, that was a new country. We're out of Israel. We're doing different things over there, and that's different. What you call fixers; those are locals who help secure the permits and the hotels and the traveling accommodations ahead of time.
Mhm.
So that was a different group of people helping us. And then Out of Egypt was something that early on in the first couple of years, people have been asking us, now that you've done Jesus, are you going to do the Exodus, and are you going to do Paul? Those are the two big ones, and
Okay.
they're big.
Right.
And it was always not yet, not yet. One, that's just going to be logistically challenging, and two, it's going to be very, very expensive. So what was different this time around was this was two countries. We were in Egypt and we were in Jordan. So once obviously you cross the Red Sea, you're in Jordan, and we looked over into Israel, but two countries in a span of 2 weeks. It was just more. It was more expensive across the board. Filming permits everywhere we went were 10 times the cost of filming in Israel and in
Wow.
Turkey. And these, you see that in the scene. We're at the foot of the traditional site of Mount Sinai, and we weren't kidding. I mean, that was months of prep. We had the permits. We had talked to the right people. The right people had been paid, and that was months in advance. And yet, you still at times show up, and you've either got the wrong paperwork, or the person you spoke with wasn't there anymore, or in that particular case, they were just asking for more. And the answer was, we gave them more and got up on the mountain.
Yeah.
I will say, on the flip side of that, every trip and multiple times each trip, there have been instances where we are given more access than we ever dreamed possible. Most of the time, they are very gracious to have us there and will give us, they'll say, hey, I specifically remember this instance. It's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It's where many historians believe was once the site of the crucifixion and the burial place, the tomb of Jesus. And that tomb is inside of what is called the edicule. It's like a building within a building. And that edicule is normally, you've got hundreds of people waiting in line to walk into this very small structure and then come out. And you get 60 seconds in there and you're moving along because all these people are waiting. But they were very gracious with us and said, look, there's a service going on in there right now, and we'll let you step in there between cleaning, and you've got 5 minutes in there, which is it's unheard of. So they
Right.
held the crowds back for us and let us go in there. And so we have a scene inside of the edicule, and that happened numerous times. And so you try to be gracious and you try to be flexible, and the vast majority of the time, we are pleasantly surprised with the things that we are able to capture when we're there. We did make the comment, both Stu and I made the comment, that had Out of Egypt been the first trip that Appian ever took, it probably would have been the only trip we ever took, because it was that difficult. It was that challenging. But
Yeah.
thankfully, we had several productions under our belt prior to that. We had a team that was used to this type of craziness. I do feel for Justin Dobbs. He's our story producer and writes a lot of our material. He's also my brother-in-law, and you'll see him in the movie.
Right.
This was his first time traveling with us, and he was
Oh.
such a good sport. We did kind of keep saying to him, it's not normally like this. It's not normally like this. And then you asked how big our crew was. Really, it was about the same amount of our team from the States. There were 7 or 8 of us.
Okay.
However, one of the key differences, and it impacted our cost quite a bit, is we were not allowed to bring in our own gear into country.
Oh.
And because we had to rent gear in each country, Egypt, and then return it, and get new gear in Jordan, and then return it, they had to provide crew with that gear, which then expanded the cost.
Right.
And so you will see in some of those shots, and especially in the behind the scenes videos that we've made, you'll see at times up to a dozen extra people kind of floating around. And these
Right.
people were wonderful. They were very thoughtful. At times there were some language barriers between some of us, but they hiked up that mountain with us as well. And they contributed blood, sweat, and tears just like we did. And we were thankful for them. But it's a different thing to move 7 or 8 people around and to move 16 or 17 people around. That added to the challenge, certainly.
Yeah. So in the documentary, that there are various places in Egypt, and then you end with Mount Nebo, and I'm curious about there's a scene where you all actually make bricks, and I'm curious. You're doing pre-production in the States, I assume.
Yes.
Do you, during pre-production, do you say, let's find somebody that makes bricks over there? That's all a part of what you're doing to kind of
Yes.
to do that. So can you talk a little bit
Right.
about that?
Absolutely. So a lot of that pre-production was done by our story team. And so you're talking about Jeremy and Justin and Stuart. Usually we get some good contributions from Dan Kingsley is one of our executive
Okay.
producers. He's also an avid photographer. And so he has accompanied us on most of our trips. And he has traveled himself to dozens of places around the world. And so it's not uncommon for him to say, yeah, I've already been there. So let me recommend. Um, I made only a couple of contributions during those early stages. And one was I had read somewhere online that you could make bricks, that people were still making bricks. And I kind of kept, hey, can we look into this? And Stu very quickly, found something and worked with that. So yes, that was planned. We gave them some heads up ahead of time, and they were, again, incredibly gracious to let a bunch of knucklehead Americans kind of interrupt their workday
Yeah.
and play around in the mud for a bit. And we even had a friendly competition between
Right.
Jeremy and myself. That was decided on the day. Had that been, talked about in early stages of pre-production, I probably would have discouraged it. But
It
yeah, we
seemed
talked
like it
about it
was
on the day and
spontaneous.
said,
Yeah.
sure, let's whip the camera around and I'll get in the mud. I didn't get like knee deep in the mud like Jeremy did,
Right.
but it was still a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it really does help you kind of get a sense of, okay, because they explained if you don't have straw for the brick, then it
Yes,
falls apart. So when Pharaoh is saying this in the book of Exodus, you then get a sense of this is already really hard. Now they have to go get the straw too to, and so it
yes,
does give you that sense of, oh, okay, this is this is bad news if Pharaoh tells you you can't have any straw. Um,
that's right.
so
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
it was really helpful for all of us just to be there and watch these guys who were doing that all day, and these were strong guys. You have to be to do that kind of work. And
Right.
for Jeremy just to do that for the few minutes that he did that, and then you're like, okay, the Exodus story tells us about people where they did that their whole lives, and then the next generation came and did that, and then the next, and it's all they knew. It's all they knew, and the job was made harder when this guy Moses shows up and says he's going to rescue them and plead to Pharaoh to let them go, and then the job gets harder. Now they have to collect their own straw, which is still necessary to make the bricks even today. um, it really did help us, and I hope it helped our viewers appreciate the struggle of Israel during that time of slavery.
Yeah, for sure. So so in that trip, I know there what in the documentary there are several places where you kind of have somebody that just kind of goes in selfie mode and says, "Okay, it's like 2:30 in the morning." And,
Yeah.
and these are people that I assume had gone on other trips before because you mentioned Justin, but he's never really looking tired on there and maybe you just kept all of those
No, he's
shots out of it. But
yeah,
but there are a few times where people are like will say, "Oh yeah, it's really early in the morning, and we're trying to go through customs," and it seems that this was something way different than what you all were used to. Um,
very much so.
yeah,
Yeah, Justin was such a great sport. I'm not sure that he complained about anything. Where I mean, I certainly did my fair share of complaining,
mhm,
and we all did. We did have a moment. There was a particularly difficult day of shooting in Jordan, so we were about 2/3 of the way through the trip, and nothing seemed to go according to plan. It was the day that we were shooting the content where you are watching Jeremy kind of wander the deserts of Jordan. It's kind of the Wadi Rum area. Very hot, very difficult. And we got to the end of that day, and all of us had kind of lost our patience with someone during the day. And I really appreciate what our team did. Our team kind of sat back and said, "Look, we could continue down this path of frustration and impatience and not represent Christ to these individuals. because we're interacting with people. Most of the people we're interacting with over there are not Christians. They have a different faith, but we're coming saying that we are, and are we acting like it? Or we can choose this path where even when things don't go well, even when things continue to be difficult, because they will be, we can show them Christ living in us. And
Right.
I'm just so thankful for our team. We talked about it and we prayed about it, and there was a shift after that time. And it's not that the schedule got easier or the situation got easier, but our mindset changed where we had forgotten. I think I can speak for myself, and probably the rest of the team. I think we had forgotten that we weren't just creating content for the good of the people we were going to bring it back to, but we had the opportunity to benefit the people we were there with in the moment and show them what Christ looked like, even in the midst of stuff like that. And I'm very glad to say I was able to have some good conversations with our fixer. Her name was Lama. They're in Jordan, and man, she put up with so much. Our team, we were doing such crazy things, and she put up with so much. And I had a great conversation with her in our last day in Jordan, and I was glad that those opportunities came up for us
Yeah.
to do that. Our hope is that we are not simply creating the right kinds of things, but that we're creating them in the right kinds of ways. And I think it was a good lesson for all of us during that time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit? I know your primary audience is these homeschool families, believers, people that might be in different ministries. Do you get any? Are you encountering people who might be Muslim or atheists or
Mhm.
coming across your content? And what if anything are you hearing from people who
Yeah,
aren't believers?
that's what's been the blessing is, yes, the description that you use there at the beginning, because it's what I provided to you, right? Homeschool
Hmm.
families and Bible believers. It's the audience that has kind of developed.
Hmm.
But when we sit down to create the content, we aren't really thinking about we're going to make it for this group or make it for this group. If anything, we're simply saying we want to make content that represents the Bible accurately and well to anyone who may be interested. And that may be the people who already know the Bible well,
Hmm.
and they're just looking for ways to teach to their children, perhaps. It may be the Bible class teachers or the preachers, but especially after year 2 or 3, where we finally actually put the content on YouTube, because that was actually not a choice we made at the beginning, but we
Right.
finally put it on YouTube, um, where everyone's watching it. They're watching it because the thumbnail interested them, right? And we have been so blessed and so pleased to see a huge variety of people watching this content, where you're right, sometimes they are Muslims because they live in that area of the world and they want to see it. And there's no interest necessarily, maybe not yet, in biblical things, but they watch the content because it's hopefully well made and it's
Hmm.
engaging and it's something that they're interested in. There are people who are watching our content just because they're interested in international travel. These are places maybe they want to go to someday. There are people who are just interested in the history and in the archaeology, especially with Searching for a King was this content that we did, heavy on the archaeology of the Bible. But then we also find people of a variety of different, Christian beliefs, where we've got people from a variety of different backgrounds watching this content and using this content, and we're very pleased with that.
Yeah.
We're obviously doing our very best to communicate what is biblical truth and what the Bible clearly says about these things, and we've been pleased to see that people of a variety of backgrounds are using that, and we encourage that, and we hope that that's a benefit to many kind of people.
Okay.
I'm
Good.
one of the ones responsible for responding to comments on YouTube,
Okay.
and that's a fun job. I could tell you all kinds. Sometimes you got to weed through and sift through the different things, but it is such a blessing when I find comments that say, I haven't read the Bible in a long time, or I haven't been to church in a long time. But I watched your content and I watched it all the way through, and it has reignited something in me.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Or someone says, I watched your content and I went immediately and read the book of First Samuel, all the way through. I binge read. I'm much more excited to hear people that have binged the Bible than binged our content necessarily.
Yeah.
But there are some people who have just shared with us, I've never sat and considered the 7 churches of Revelation. I skip those because I want to go to the visions and the interesting things about Revelation.
Okay.
And so we get all kinds. And I'm thrilled to be able, in many cases, to respond to and communicate with those people who leave those kinds of comments.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I have about Out of Egypt that I want to ask about, because that was all really, you were kind of, so I don't know if was Stewart in the it at all. Maybe I just didn't.
Yes.
He wasn't specifically spoken of.
You
or
do.
who he was.
You spot him a couple of times. So Stewart is the guy when we are one of many times, but we only caught it on camera the one time, where we are stopped by security. We're on our way to a museum or something. And Stewart is the one who does a lot of those selfie videos saying we've been stopped by the police. We've got the permits, but we're being checked by all these individuals. Or Stu's the one who is speaking for all of us as we're huffing and puffing up the mountain. And he's like, there's 700 steps and we're all going to die. And
okay, I know who he is now. I know
so
exactly
that is
who
Stewart.
that is. Right.
His role, he did quite a bit of, the vast majority of the development and pre-production leading up to the trip. And then on the trip, believe it or not, he was the audio recorder. So he's the one recording all of the sound. So the interviews and the people as they're talking, but also the sounds of the area.
Mm-hmm.
And Stu's incredibly talented at that and did a lot of that. So again, he takes off the co-founder hat and puts on the sound recordist hat. And in the same way that while I'm on the trip, I'm not the director. I'm just another one of the shooters. And so I take that hat off, and now I'm a cinematographer. So, yep.
Yeah, that's now that you say that about the audio, that was something that I thought was interesting. So there's this shot where Jeremy and Justin are kind of like sitting by a fire or something, and they're talking about something, but there are several different shots, but like the audio, I was looking for like a wireless mic or something, and I couldn't quite
they're
see
hidden.
one.
Stu's very good at his job.
He's very good, because the audio was great, but I was like, where's the wireless mic? I don't see it on either of them. And it looks like you're just there with them, and you can hear it just fine. So that he's the one that's responsible for that. So that's good.
Yeah. Now, occasionally the camera will pull back and it'll show some of us crew.
Yeah.
Because not only are they often mic'd, but Stu is also typically out there with a boom mic, holding that out to capture some of that other stuff. And then, time permitting, he would normally just grab a shotgun mic and kind of just walk around the space, because we don't think about it, but you realize it's not there when it's missing. It's just the sound of every space, even out there in the desert where there was no traffic, there were no people, but there's still sound out there.
Right.
And so we've got these epic photos of Stu wandering the desert with a microphone,
right.
Capturing the ambiance of that. And so, that was his role.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, y'all get to the top of Mount Sinai, and all of a sudden you hear somebody say hallelujah. And so apparently somebody had to have that mic kind of over there or something to catch that, because everybody kind of turns and is like, who is that?
That's right. Yeah, that was not planned at all.
Right.
We kind of kept hearing him back there, and we're like, keep rolling, just let Jeremy kind of finish up his interview. But this guy, man, he was just thrilled to be up there at the top.
Yeah.
And we kind of whipped the camera around, and the microphones get whipped around. And, he was so infectiously excited to be up there. And And then we very quickly were like, hey, by the way, we're shooting a large documentary here. Can we, get your name and make sure this is okay? And he
Exactly.
was very gracious. He was a good guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that stuff like that. And there were many moments like that, especially in Out of Egypt, and a good bit of that in Trial and Triumph, where things just happen.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things I love about documentary
Right.
is it keeps you on your toes. Sometimes the best part of a scene are the parts that you don't plan.
Hmm. Okay, so it is the next project Paul's missionary journeys. What's
Actually,
coming up?
yes.
Yes, or
Um,
is that a
Question mark.
question mark? Okay.
It is early. It is early in development, but that is the thing that we've got our eyes on. And we're excited for that. Um, we're excited to start that ball rolling.
Hmm.
And what I'm looking forward to, um, we are currently in post production of several other pieces,
Okay.
and we're making a children's version of our Exodus story. We've done a series of videos called Lessons from the Land. We've done one called Lessons from the Land, the Gospels, and they're shorter videos hosted by Barry Britnell, another one of our hosts.
Hmm.
You see him in Following the Messiah and in Searching for a King. And um, and he does a series called Lessons from the Land. We've done one on the Gospels and on the First Kings. And now we're creating one called The Exodus. And that's going to come out here, Lord willing, here in the next few months.
Okay.
But already down the line here, the pipeline is we're starting early stages of what would be not just Paul's missionary journeys, but the whole book of Acts. We want to tell that entire
Oh.
story.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and so then you're talking about a lot of different things. This will be multiple trips. There's just no way around that.
Yeah.
And we're excited to really delve into. I mean, that is the history of the early church. That's where we see, really the power of the gospel changing lives, not just the lives of the apostles, but the people that they're interacting with, and especially what it does with the man Saul, who becomes
Hmm.
Paul, and what he does, which we are, I mean, so much so still benefiting from now, thousands of years later.
Yeah.
So we're excited to do that. We have not, I say question mark and things like that. We haven't made an official announcement so much,
Right. Okay.
but that's the nature of what we do. Is there's quite a bit of work on the front end of things before you ever get to, start a fundraiser.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Acts, I mean, there's so many historical and archaeological things that you could look
Oh
into
yes,
when you go overseas. So it's just, I mean, you could probably do multiple movies off of that. I would assume. I don't know what you're
yes.
thinking in terms of.
How do you
So I don't,
break it down?
how do you break that down? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
going to be the
yeah,
challenge. But those are the things we get excited about.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So we're expecting an announcement about that, I guess, in the near future, I guess, and
Lord
then we
willing,
but
absolutely.
then it would be probably a multi-year project, you think, or
Yes. So, as in the case of Following the Messiah, we took a trip and we released what was half the story. We did Jesus's life up until, about 2 years in, and
Mhm,
then we had to take another trip and create 5 more. Um, I'm not necessarily committing to 5 episodes each trip, but more than likely it will be, we will travel over and create enough content for approximately half of the story of Acts, and then we'll try to do the second half on a subsequent trips. We'll see.
okay. Well, is there anything else that you're excited about right now? Is that kind of the main thing with
That's the kind of the main thing. I will say that Justin has been working on the printed workbook that will accompany Out of Egypt, and so we did release the video when the video was ready. But we do have workbooks that go along with every video, and Justin has been working tirelessly on what will be our most robust piece of written content that will accompany this, and it's very close to its final stages before we could send that off to the printers, and I'm really excited to get that into the hands of people. And so with that workbook, and then another set of videos with lessons from the land, the Exodus, and as with everything that we do, it's what God allows us to do.
Right.
And as quickly or as slowly as that happens, so much of that is dependent on the funding and the availability of our team. The vast majority of us are not doing this full time. Jeremy is a full-time evangelist where he's at, as is Justin. Barry is a software developer, but he loves to take trips over to the Bible lands.
Yeah.
And so making time and making this work, there are plans, and we would very much like to really take this to the next level for some of us like myself, where we can commit to this thing full time and start producing content quicker between trips. So you can pray for that, as we are praying for that, that could be something that we could do in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that would be. So that is the kind of the vision moving forward, to be doing that full time for several of you. We'll be certainly praying for that. Okay. Well, I'm gonna. We need to start winding it up. I know I've only got about 20 more minutes with you. I gave you a few questions to think about towards the end. I like to ask these questions to everybody because I like to see what the different how everybody answers this differently. But do you have a book right now, other than, I don't know if you've written a book, but other than the Bible or other than one of your own, that you are currently recommending to people?
This was difficult. This might be a cop out. I don't think it is. I'm currently reading The Fellowship of the Ring to my children right now.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of The Lord of the Rings and what Tolkien did. And it's the first time I've been able to read it to my kids. And it is a story where good and evil are clearly defined. Self-sacrifice and courage are rewarded. And especially for my boys, it gives them heroes that they can aspire to. And I feel like over the last 15, 20 years that there have not been many stories that accomplish those things for my kids. Okay. And so that's something I'm reading to them and very much enjoying.
Now, you've read it before, I assume.
Yes, I certainly have. I'm kind of a Lord of the Rings nerd. If you could see this other part of my office, I've got Gandalf's sword up on my wall, and I've got every book. And New Zealand is a place that I would like to visit, simply because they filmed the movies there. But I love the books because it's one of the most richly developed and described worlds when it comes to fiction. But there are morals and lessons, again, not overtly Christian,
right?
But there are morals and lessons in there that I believe our culture has forgotten, and we would be better to remind ourselves and learn from some of these things. And I miss that in most stories nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we didn't really talk about this, but is it possible that down the line Appian Media does some kind of some of this kind of Christian fiction
that
stuff?
That is a question.
Or are you committed to kind of documentaries, and maybe that would have to be a different
It's
endeavor?
Still in my blood to want to create content like that. I have not had the opportunity to do that for many years. I did produce several short films prior to my time with Appian, accomplishing what I hope to do. I've now actually since learned my craft better. So you're not going to see these short films online anywhere. Like, don't go looking for them.
Okay.
But that creative itch never does quite go away. And so who knows?
Okay. Yeah, I checked out like the full 3-volume set of Lord of the Rings, and one time a few years ago when I had some free time, and I just never could get there to start reading it. So maybe I can pick it up again.
You've got to have a lot of free time. Like,
there has to
I'm
be a lot
reading
of
it to my
time.
kids, and it's a chapter every, few days. It's robust,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. It's a tradition that we like to do with our kids. So,
Okay. All right. Do you have an interesting quote or a scripture that you've been thinking a lot about lately, or that you would?
yeah, it's a scripture, and I'm sure you've heard this one. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15.
Mm,
Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. And that's something that I take very seriously during the opportunities where I have to preach and to teach, but especially as I'm communicating these biblical truths to my kids and to other people face to face. And even in the work that we're doing with Appian Media, we are handling the truth, and we need to make sure that what we're presenting is truthful and accurate, um, and the full counsel of God. And so we need to be diligent and unashamed workers. I think there's so much in this text. We're not bystanders. We're not, primarily counseling or prepping other people to do the work. We ourselves are workers,
right.
and we need to be deep in the Word. I need to be spending most of my time reading and rereading that text, and so there is some benefit, and I would advocate it of reading what other people have written about the text, but nothing beats writing or nothing beats reading the text itself. Because if we're not careful, sometimes we have a tendency to put the opinions of men about the Bible
Yeah.
above the Bible itself, and once we start doing that, we're in dangerous territory. This is the life-giving Word of God, and I need to make sure that I'm handling it correctly.
Yeah. And I think again, the work that you've been doing with Appian Media, it's something that I'm sure has increased your appreciation that this is the word of God, that
Yes.
you continually are seeing all of this evidence archaeologically, historically. You're going to these different countries and seeing up close the evidence for it. I'm at a place right now where I often have atheists in the comments that are saying, the Bible's just a bunch of fairy tales. This is, and one of the things I often say is, well, it doesn't read like a fairy tale, and there's real evidence here that we can
Yes.
look at. And part of what Appian Media does is points out that evidence and makes it kind of freely accessible to people. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. That was a
Yeah.
question that came up when we began the Searching for a King series. We intended to do a series on the first kings of Israel, specifically David. And I don't think any of us realized it as much at the time, but we very quickly became aware how many people doubt that David was even a real person.
Right.
They talk about him like he was a King Arthur kind of legendary figure that Israel created hundreds of years later to make themselves feel more important about their nation.
Right.
And when you start questioning, was this person real? Was this place real? Then you start questioning, was this event real? Is God real? And we answer those types of doubts. Everyone has them. I think we all have them at some point. Is this book, is it actually what it says it is?
Yeah.
All of it or just some of it? And that's a struggle I think many Christians are having right now, especially with my generation, is yeah, that part's believable. I can buy that. But when it says he created the whole world in 7 days, like, come on.
Right.
Well, are we going to take it for what it says it is, or are we not? And why? Just because it makes me feel good to believe the whole thing, or is there evidence for it? And we delved quite deep with Searching for a King, so much so that we continue to prevail upon that type of reasoning in our other projects. Is
Yeah.
this book can be trusted? It's not been corrupted. It is in fact God's life-giving word, and we can trust what it says, even the parts that seem unbelievable.
Right.
It's okay to acknowledge that a God beyond us can do things that are beyond our understanding. But there are so many times where he makes sure that we can line things up that are within our understanding and go, look, he said it happened there, and wouldn't you know, that place exists. And he said this person was ruling during that time, and wouldn't you know, here's here's this, an inscription on this wall of a neighboring nation that hates Israel, but they still acknowledge that such and such a king existed.
Right.
There's so much of it that you can't just disregard it out of hand or dismiss it out of hand as fairy tales. You are right. It doesn't read like a fairy tale. It reads like a history.
Yeah. So that's what's so cool. I hadn't even thought about referring people to Appian Media, but I'll like particularly that Searching for a King series is one of those, because what happens is these skeptics will say things, and then you find this archaeological evidence that now this thing that you were skeptical about is no longer something to be skeptical, but they'll just move on to something else. So
Right.
it's always a moving goalpost, but that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
we understand this to be the word of God. So, um, what is a unconventional belief you have? What is something you believe that many other people don't?
This is probably not what you're looking for. I believe that coffee can be consumed near bedtime, frankly. I don't know if you're probably
I
looking for
don't.
something
Yeah,
more
I
deep
don't.
than that. Um,
And
um,
you believe this for all humans, or is
oh,
this just
yeah,
for?
I'm not sure. I think if enough proper training is done, that it
Okay,
can be done.
coffee can be
Um,
consumed near bedtime. So, are
and
you
I
one of
don't
those
know.
people that
I
drinks it
struggled
throughout the
with your
day, I guess?
question a little bit.
Yeah.
How many is many?
Uh-huh.
If I consider the story of Jesus, the fact is the vast majority of humanity doesn't believe it's true.
Yeah.
Um, and I believe that it is. I believe that the evidence is profoundly undeniable. Um, and unlike coffee, I'm not actually going to like really convince people that they need to drink coffee right before bed.
Mhm.
But if I believe that something is true, I really do. I'm going to feel compelled to tell as many people about it as I possibly can.
Right.
Um, and so it's my prayer and my aim that specifically when it comes to Jesus and when it comes to the reliability of the biblical text, man, I'm going to tell as many people as I possibly can so that it doesn't have to be something that a few of us believe, but most people don't. Let's turn that thing around where
Yeah.
it's, look, we can all acknowledge the truth of what this thing is.
Yeah. What would you say? Sometimes I come across people who are believers, and they are believers in the sense that they would say that they are Christians, but not necessarily that God created everything in 6 days, not necessarily that there was a virgin birth, not necessarily that. What would you say to those people who are kind of picking certain parts of
Sure.
Scripture that they're good with, and other parts that they're not? Because
I would
I think there are a
ask
lot of people
them
like that.
why they believe God. Not
Mm,
necessarily why they believe in God, but why do you believe God? Because if I interacted with someone who more often than not, they were telling me these things that weren't true, or they were talking to me in such a way so that they told me enough lies that I doubted when they spoke, even when they were telling the truth,
mhm.
would I consider that person trustworthy? And so, if you want to approach the Bible and say, in the very first few chapters, God gives me a story that isn't true. And by the time you're done with Genesis, I know people who say, I believe in God, but by the time they're done with the very first book, they've pointed out several things that they say that wasn't accurate. That isn't true. I would consider that person who's telling me a story like that, I'd consider them an untrustworthy source. I wouldn't give them the time of day. Why should I read the next book? Why should I even get as far as Jesus so that when you get to the point of telling me that someone died and stayed dead for days and then got back up again, I I don't believe you. I've stopped believing you long ago.
Right.
Frankly, God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh, to me, is not necessarily the most unbelievable part of the biblical story. There are other elements that to me are even more unbelievable. So if I can't believe God at the beginning, why would I trust him with any of the rest? And so really when it comes to if I remove God and I just put that as another human being, how would I treat that relationship? I wouldn't trust that person as far as I could throw them.
Yeah.
And so, can you really say, I believe in God, when you are also saying, I don't actually believe what he says to me? I believe that to be inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Is there a piece of wisdom that if you were leaving behind your for your family that you um,
Man,
you've got a
these are
son, or
great
you have at least one son, I
questions,
think.
by the way. These are great questions.
Oh, okay.
These are questions everyone ought to be asking themselves on a regular basis. Because I have 3 kids, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And you think about all the things you say to your kids and what things you hope stick with them. And it's remarkable, 2 weeks down the line, they'll remember that really obscure thing that you said,
Right.
and they'll forget the really important instruction that you gave.
Right.
I hope that they take with them the wisdom that they are to love the Lord their God with all their heart and soul and mind and strength. And they're supposed to love their neighbor as themselves. And when they take time to consider what those things mean, they'll need to dig further. Who is God? And how do I love my neighbor? And what does that look like in my life? Obviously, they'll go to the Word and find it there, because when I'm gone, they'll still have this thing, which really my job as a parent is just to get them to fall in love with the God that wrote this,
Right.
and the Christ that died for them so that they could have a relationship with God. And so I want them to love him. I want them to love him and know him and love other people in such a way that shows that they do love him. So
Okay. That's great wisdom to leave behind. So, if someone wants to get in contact with you, how do they best do that?
they can hop on appianmedia.org. So APPIAN media.org. There's a contact form on there. It actually comes to myself. But you can also, it's kind of fun. You can Google my name, and I'm the only Craig Dehut on the internet.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
for
Nice.
now, please don't like start naming your kids Craig. That's
Yeah.
or Craig Dehut. That's odd. But you can
Yeah.
find me online. You can find me on Google and reach out to me. And I really do encourage it. I love to hear from other people, especially other people who are doing creative things in the kingdom.
Hmm.
And maybe it's filmmaking, maybe it's something completely different. But I'm so encouraged just to be reminded that there are other people out there doing good, encouraging things that are benefiting people. And so, by all means, find me online and reach out to me in that way. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. Yeah, that if you're wanting to get in touch with Craig, appianmedia.org, and you can go through the contact form or just look up the name Craig Dehut, Dehut, and you can probably, your email's probably floating around somewhere out there
It's
to
there.
just
Yep.
email directly. All right. Anything else you want to say to the people before we get out of here?
No, I'm thrilled with what you're doing with this podcast, and I'm excited to honestly listen to more of what you've done. And I'd encourage people to ask good questions like you've been asking.
Yeah.
Um, Find truth, buy truth, and do not sell it. And that takes the effort to go and find reliable sources that have the truth. Go after it. Put
Yeah.
forth effort. Dig in that field and find that treasure.
Yeah.
And I love what you're doing to kind of help people think through that and work through that.
Yeah. Yeah, the evidence is out here. There are people that say I'm in here going. You're talking about going at people in the comments on YouTube, and I don't know. I'm attracting all of these people that are saying, "Oh, there's no evidence of God," and I'm like, "No, no, it's everywhere." I don't,
Everywhere. Yep.
I don't know. So there's a lot of that, but it is everywhere if you keep seeking, and that's kind of what the thing I'm trying to tell people. Hey, keep looking. It's there. So
Yeah.
there's so much evidence out here. Thankful for Appian Media for really making more of that accessible in an easy to digest form, because that's really good. So thankful for Craig for coming on the show today. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep the faith. Thank you.